magical, beyond ordinary world of NOGS. As we all know, NOGS has conducted a variety of CMEs on various topics, which has been extremely beneficial for all of us. Obstetrics practice has evolved literally from lies to present day cutting edge technology. Ultrasound contributes immensely to obstetrics and its application and use is now widespread. The use of ultrasound has revolutionized obstetrics and gynecology in past 3 decades. Today, we have excellent orator, a teacher par excellence, and full of information, Dr. Pratima Radhakrishnan ma'am, who will give us insight on optimizing management of non-lethal fetal anomalies. Ma'am, we are very happy to welcome you here today. I now request our unstoppable and vivacious president, Dr. Vedahi Marathe ma'am, to please give a welcome. Ma'am, please unmute.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Today's esteemed faculty, respected Dr. Pratima, respected chairpersons, Dr. Taide and Dr. Rathod, respected seniors, dear friends, boys and girls. I welcome you all to the VR world, that is Vedahi Rajase's virtual to reality world. The unique digital space where we present a weekly extravagant feast of academic and non-academic bonanza. Friends, we are probably the only society to start these stand-alone ongoing CMEs each week with very practical, clinically important, very basic topics, which is the USP of our DGO GAN. With the new year ringing in, we are back with a bang, and you will soon know why I say this after you listen to today's faculty. By now, you all of you know that we conduct DGO GAN under 3 modules, and today's session is under the guidelines and protocol module, which is on a very important, intriguing, and challenging issues all of us face in our clinical practice. The real drama begins only after a non-lethal anomaly is diagnosed and all hell breaks loose. But worry not, as today we have amongst us a very distinguished speaker, a name to reckon with in the field of fetal medicine, Dr. Pratima Ramakrishnan. I am myself a very big fan of her mastery over this subject. She will show us the logical path to solving this dilemma. The session will be conducted today in a different pattern. 6 fellows of our institute will present a case each, and Madam Pratima will give us guidelines on management of each of the anomaly. So we are all looking forward to an interesting session today. So without much ado, I once again welcome Dr. Pratima and thank her profusely for accepting our invitation. And dear doctors, welcome back to this action-packed virtual learning platform yet again. Together, let's rock the VR world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Today, for such a novel topic, we have very creative chairpersons for today's session.
Swada, I'm just changing the settings. You may have to unmute yourself once again. 1 minute. Huh? Yeah, now you can unmute and talk.
Yeah.
Swada, sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, ma'am.
We acknowledge the presence of our MMC observer for today, Dr. Shashikant Raghuvanshi. Sorry, Swada, please carry on.
Yeah, no problem. So for such a novel topic, we have very creative chairpersons with us for today's session. Our first chairperson is Dr. Kunda Shahane ma'am. Madam is fetal medicine consultant practicing in Nagpur since many years now. She has won many awards at the regional level conferences and she has attended many national and international conferences. We welcome you, ma'am. Second chairperson for today is Dr. Namrata Rathod. Madam is an obstetrician and gynecologist and she has special interest in fetal medicine. She is practicing at Rathod Nursing Home, Chowni, Nagpur since last 21 years now. Over to you, Kunda, madam.
Thank you, Swada, for such a nice introduction. Today, for this webinar, I welcome on behalf of NOGS VR team to Dr. Pratima Radhakrishnan ma'am. It is indeed a pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Pratima Radhakrishnan ma'am. She is a leading fetal medicine specialist in our country. She is a director and consultant at Bangalore Fetal Medicine Center. She is also director at IMA BFMC Fetal Care Center. She is a consultant fetal medicine at Manipal Hospital, Bangalore. She is a founder member of Indian Society of Obstetric Ultrasound. She is a founder member of Society of Fetal Medicine of India. She's been part of many training and teaching programs in India in the field of fetal medicine. She's been a faculty of many national and international conferences. She's been awarded with Arnimal Award for the best presentation in fetal medicine on fetal dysmorphology in 2009 at AICC RCOG conference. She's also been awarded with Dr. Mohinder Kochar Award in 2011 at AICC RCOG conference. She has first introduced laser ablation therapy in India for TTTS in twin pregnancy. She's Her passion for the fetal treatment and many teaching and training programs for the many student doctors to achieve their goals par excellence. I welcome you, ma'am, for this today's webinar. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kunda. Thank you, Vaidehi. Thank you, Swadha, Rajsi, Namrata, and everybody. And it's always a pleasure to come back to Nagpur Society because I've got a very special place for Nagpur in my heart, of course, and for very obvious reasons. So I'm going to share my screen, if you please allow me to.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay, can you see that?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Right. So we're going to talk about how we can optimize the outcomes of non-lethal anomalies. Now, we know that fetal anomalies are many fetal anomalies, and really to go through all of them is not practically possible. But I hope that, we have brought out about 10 cases, which, hopefully will kind of give you a generalized idea about when you see a fetal anomaly, how to kind of decide whether it is, lethal or non-lethal and how to go about it. So I hope by the end of this, we'll have some clarity in these things, because yes, of course, when you say non-lethal anomalies, and it's always like non-lethal by who defining it, right? Now let's go back to very strict definition. What is lethal anomaly? By definition, lethality is something which will cause death. Now, when we talk about fetal, it's not just in utero death, but we should also be looking at immediate postnatal death, right? So conditions which will cause death in utero, which are actually far and few conditions which cause in utero death, but also there are huge number of a number of anomalies that will cause death within the first week of life, which again amounts to a pregnancy failure, if I can use that terminology. Right now, again, coming to non-lethal anomalies. Now, non-lethal anomalies can be two types. One, which will cause high morbidity, which means there are a lot of interventions that will be required postnatally, and to maintain life will be quite challenging. And of course, these challenges could be emotional challenges, it could be social challenges, it could even be financial challenges. So again, morbidity has got a huge spectrum of definition. Low morbidity is, where with maybe one or two interventions, things do settle down, right? And the need for rehabilitation is far less. Now, again, all these anomalies can fall into any of these categories, depending upon really who you speak to. So it is very challenging to kind of say that non-lethal anomalies by which definition, because there is no clear-cut definition for the same. Now, when we talk about any fetal anomaly for that matter, particularly in this ones where there is a possibility of continuing the pregnancy and the chances of the baby dying in utero or immediate ex utero is far less, it is very important to assess the anomaly in detail, which means that we need to probably even take second or even a third opinion sometimes to ensure that there is a consistency in diagnosis. It's important to check any previous screening tests, because many of these anomalies could be associated with chromosomal abnormalities. Now, previous screening tests could be in the form of first trimester scans. If you're looking at them later on, it could be blood tests, that is the serum screening, or any other situations, even for that matter, fetal high drop. So you need to look at the possibility of rhesus isoimmunization as well. Look for additional anomalies. Now, again, the more the number of anomalies, the chances of a chromosomal or genetic anomalies increases. And if a so-called non-lethal anomaly is associated with additional anomalies, like in the heart or like in the other in the brain, it converts the entire spectrum and makes it lethal or a non-lethal with a high morbidity. Now, of course, again, when anomalies are isolated, they're more likely to be of low morbidity, but again, important to understand that even isolated anomalies can be associated with chromosomal or genetic diagnosis. And last but not the least, the gestational age of diagnosis, because, for example, Down syndrome diagnosed after 20 weeks does not allow you to terminate the pregnancy. It's a non-lethal anomaly, but it is an anomaly with a high morbidity. So the thing is, again, the extent of lethality that is defined in a court versus what is defined for the parents versus what is defined by the obstetrician can be hugely variable. For example, a missing arm or a forearm, we know that it's quite difficult to live without a hand or a leg, and it has got huge morbidity. But if you go to the court, it is not defined as a lethal anomaly, right? So it is a non-lethal anomaly, but the implications of having that anomaly is very variable. So there is no clear-cut definition for lethal or a non-lethal anomaly, and therefore each of them needs to be taken on its own merit. So for me, it's easier to say that lethal anomaly is an anomaly which will cause a fetal death or an early neonatal death. The anomaly itself will cause a fetal death or a neonatal death. For example, high drops from heart blocks, right? Versus the bilateral renal agenesis. Bilateral renal agenesis is not lethal in utero, but it will not allow the baby to live for longer than a week or 10 days, 2 weeks maximum, because once the baby is born, it needs to use its kidneys to get rid of the toxins in its body. So it's not lethal in utero, but it is lethal ex utero. So anything else other than these, which will not cause death of the fetus or early neonatal death, can be classified as non-lethal anomalies. Right now, I'm just going to go through a few cases which will kind of give you an idea of how a same anomaly sometimes can be associated with simple stuff versus more complicated stuff, and how we can kind of manage them. So Ridhima, can you go through this, please? Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Hi, I'm Dr. Ridhima. Good evening, everyone. The first case is a 34-year-old primigravida, spontaneous conception, non-consanguineous marriage. She has a family history of diabetes and hypertension, non-significant medical history. She was referred to BFMC in view of increased risk on anti-scan. The NT was 5.1. And biochemistry showed low PAPA and low beta HCG and normal PAPA, and the combined risk was 1 in 8 for trisomy 21. In view of increased risk, we offered her invasive testing in NIPT, and the couple opted for invasive testing. Chorionic villi sampling was done, and sample was sent for FISH for major chromosome and microarray. The FISH came negative and microarray was normal. The patient followed up elsewhere and delivered a baby boy at term who was healthy and 2.8 kg.
Now, I think we know that increased NT 5.1, majority of the people, this is really bad. 1 in 8 means this is really bad. Now, 1 in 8, you need to translate into other things to say that 1 in 8 also means that 7 out of the 8 babies will be normal, but then 7 out of 8 babies will be normal, but 1 baby will have a chromosomal abnormality. Now, if in the absence of a chromosomal abnormality, no structural defects or cardiac defects, the chances of having a healthy live baby decreases with increasing nuchal translucency. But even at 5.1, there is a 50% chance that this baby could be normal, right? And why it is important? One is, of course, to give chance to this baby in that 50%. Secondly, it is very important to know why this baby has got increased nuchal translucency, because only when you know why this baby has got increased nuchal translucency will you be able to counsel them in the subsequent pregnancies. Now, again, follow-up is very important in these cases because there are many genetic syndromes that can be associated with increased NT. And if you have ensured that the baby has got a normal karyotype or a microarray, there is normal heart and there is no additional structural abnormalities, the incidence of developmental delay in this group of babies is the same as in general population. What is very important is that the long-term follow-up is required. Now, when you have an increased NT with normal karyotype and CMA, a good practice would be to do an early anomaly scan at 16, 17 weeks, because again, what we want to do is we want to finalize this pregnancy before 20 weeks, a good detailed anomaly scan at 18, 19 weeks, and a fetal echo as well, because generally the heart structure, if you have made sure the connections are normal, the chambers are normal, it doesn't really change dramatically. And the chances of finding a cardiac defect in the form of an aortic stenosis or pulmonary stenosis is the main thing which can happen later on in pregnancy, and that incidence is low. And what we would also throw in a follow-up scan in the third trimester, primarily looking for certain anomalies that need to be attended to at birth. Right, like for example, a diaphragmatic hernia, which can present late in the pregnancy also, and that can be sorted at birth. Right, so it's very important in the presence of an increased NT, we have a proper follow-up protocol, and this is very fixed. I mean, this doesn't have to be, there is no much debate about this, to be very honest. And a resolving nuchal edema would be very reassuring, but if there is same or increasing nuchal edema, then we need to think about the possibility of genetic syndromes. And I suppose majority of the places do have access to geneticists, if not the geneticists themselves, because they're quite a rare breed, but still, many of them do video consultations now, and things have gotten simpler as far as video consultations is concerned post-COVID, and one must consider referring them to a genetics team to take a good family history, a pedigree history, and assess on that basis. But to be honest, it's very important to get to a diagnosis, even more so when it is a non-lethal anomaly, because you want an early diagnosis and you want early justification for your actions. Okay, so with an NT which is more than 4 millimeters ultrasound, and I have put NIPT in brackets. Now, the reason why I put NIPT in brackets is one must understand that NIPT is a test that was designed for Down syndrome. Right, so it's very good for Down syndrome. It has got a 99% accuracy for Down syndrome, but it's not so great for other chromosomal abnormalities. So when you have a high NT, you're not only looking for Down syndrome, but you're looking for a whole bunch of other chromosomal abnormalities that is not picked up by an NIPT. So in these situations, it's better not to do an NIPT and go for an invasive testing, which is far better. So that is, with that, I would move on to the second case scenario. Ridhima, can you carry on, please?
Yes, ma'am. The second case is a 41 years old mother. She's a positive blood group, non-consanguineous marriage with no significant family history. She has polio. She's a third gravida with a boy, 11 years old, doing well, and a girl who died at 7 years of age. The cause was unknown, but she had a history of microcephaly. In her present pregnancy, which is an IVF conception, she came to BFMC at 12 weeks. The scan showed equivocal nasal bone with a normal NT. And the biochemistry showed high beta HCG and low PAP-A. The risk was 1 in 33 for trisomy 21, high risk. And in view of this combined high risk, the options of invasive testing and NIPT was offered to her. And in view of previous history of microcephaly and death of the girl child, genetic consultation was also advised. The couple decided to go for an invasive testing, and a CVS was done, which showed a normal karyotype. She followed for a routine anomaly scan and eventually delivered a healthy baby girl at term. Thank you.
So now the thing is, the bugbear here is an equivocal or an absent nasal bone. Again, the reason why I picked up this particular thing is, Equivocal nasal bone, we have not really used that in the risk assessment. We've just in that particular risk assessment, we used only the NT and the biochemistry, and the biochemistry was a clearly off the mark as well, and therefore the risk went up. Now, we must remember the majority of these babies are normal as well, but yes, present, an absent nasal bone will increase the risk for aneuploidies. Unfortunately, if you're doing a risk assessment in the first trimester, we have the luxury of time, and therefore NIPT also is a good option. And however, if the parents want a definitive test, then invasive is the only way forward. And if it is normal, we carry on. So we would reassess them at around 16, 17 weeks if they're not keen on invasive or NIPT, because NIPT is still a bit on the more expensive side. So we would just carry on and see them around 16, 17 weeks. And if there is still, a hypoplastic nasal bone, then we would discuss with them. So a lot of these abnormalities, although the parents get very worried thinking that there is something terribly wrong with the nose of the baby, etc., etc., I think a lot of it it boils down to good counseling to ensure that a lot of it is good counseling to ensure that the parents are on the right path rather than on the road of termination. Because to be honest, termination should be absolutely the last resort for any fetal problem, really. Okay. So one of the questions here I just noticed as I was going through is whether, sorry. I will.
She says, does NIPT in India give 22q11 microdeletion diagnosis as abroad?
Yeah. See, the thing is, one must remember the NIPT is not a diagnostic test. NIPT is only a screening test. Okay. So NIPT can say only high risk for 22q microdeletion, and of course you have to specifically ask for microdeletion syndromes. Of course, the NIPT currently is not validated. Even abroad, it is not validated for microdeletions as yet. And I don't think we should use NIPT for microdeletion purposes. We should use it where there is doubt about Down syndrome in an otherwise structurally normal baby. And this is very important, structurally normal baby, because there are many atypical abnormalities that can present with the NIPT. Is that the next question relevant to here as well? Ideal time for NIPT, well, before 18 weeks preferably, because NIPT results takes about 2 weeks to get. And if an NIPT is high risk, or if it is a low fetal fraction, that means they're not able to give you a result, then you should have time to do an amniocentesis and at least do the FISH results, because we know after an NIPT there is still action pending. So I would say that, after 18 weeks it can be dangerous. You should be more cautious about it.
Yes.
May I request? No, I mean, yeah. I don't like to call any woman elderly, to be very honest. So I think all women are young, and I don't think we should go with the age, because age is just only a number, and we have so many other ways of assessing the risk. So I think it's time that we come out of age as a major risk factor and say age is your starting point, and from then on, from the looks of the baby and from the biochemical markers, we move you up and down the risk assessment scale, right? So,
may I just request the attending doctors to post their questions at the end? Otherwise, we may miss out on the questions which are posted earlier. We'll have a long Q&A session as well at the end of the session. So please post them a little later.
Okay, so I will stop looking at the flashing yellows on my screen.
Exactly, and the speaker gets distracted with that chat popping up all the time. Thank you so much. Yeah, Dr. Pratima, please go ahead.
So Ashwini, can you go into the third case, please?
Yes, ma'am. I'm Dr. Ashwini presenting the third case. 29 years old, primigravida, spontaneous conception, non-consanguineous marriage, was referred to BFMC in view of increased risk for trisomy 18 and trisomy 13 in double marker done elsewhere. NT scan was reported normal. She had come for consultation with us. We confirmed her NT reports. There was no obvious fetal abnormalities and NT was normal, whereas her double marker showed beta HCG of 0.098 moms and PAPE of 0.172 moms, which increased the risk for trisomy 13 and trisomy 18 of 1 in 52. In view of this, we offered her early anomaly scan and invasive testing. The couple were undecided. They reported to us for early anomaly scan, which showed multiple anomalies, that is unilateral cleft lip and palate, bilateral clenched fist with overlapping fingers, bilateral rocker bottom feet, abdominal calcification, and bilateral choroid plexus cyst. As there was increased association with chromosomal and genetic anomalies, we had offered her invasive testing and genetic consultation with DNA storage. The couple opted for the same. They underwent amniocentesis. Fish and karyotype confirmed trisomy 18. The couple opted for termination of the pregnancy. The recurrence of such condition in future pregnancy is 1%.
So I think, when you actually look at those images of the unilateral cleft lip, ignore these images, the unilateral cleft lip palate. And if there's somebody says that there's a unilateral cleft lip palate, my first this thing is, oh, it can be corrected, and the plastic surgeons do a reasonably good job. And it may be 2 or 3 surgeries. So I would call it a moderate postnatal morbidity. But also remember, we are in a healthcare setup where majority of these things are sorted in a private healthcare system. So when we have a private healthcare system, we have different socioeconomic status of the parents, and for what we think a low morbidity could be high financial implication for the parents, because we are thinking not only about just surgically correcting it, but CLAPS will require speech therapy and continuous rehabilitation as well, right? So unilateral CLAP, even though it sounds reasonably good, and say, oh, there is no other abnormality, it is CPC, something like a CPC can be some which is evolving, and it could disappear by 20 weeks. And again, feet assessment of the feet is very important, because many of these even not so simple looking anomalies can be associated with additional anomalies. So if there are associated anomalies, that will certainly increase the risk. And it is important to remember that there is possibility of genetic syndromes even in isolated cases. So in this case, we did a microarray and a DNA storage, because DNA is like a piggy bank. You store the DNA, and it can be stored up to 2 years. And if for some reason the baby doesn't make it, or you need to test it later on, the DNA can be tested, and saving them doing another invasive test. In this case, the microarray, because there was already trisomy 18, which was detected early on, so we didn't need to obviously we would not need to use the DNA storage. Now she's got trisomy 18-13, and the risk of recurrence is 1% or even less than that. And in the future pregnancies, if structurally the baby looks all right, we may not need to do an invasive testing, because we know trisomy 18 and 13 will show a lot of structural abnormalities on the scan, and importantly, the morbidity or the lethality is high. So the reason why I put this up was there was a so-called non-lethal abnormality, or non-lethal abnormalities, which was associated with a lethal genetic condition. So these kind of things can also happen, and therefore evaluation of the anomaly is extremely important. So move on to case 4.
Mrs. DEF, 32 years old, non-consanguineous marriage, gravida to abortion 1. Her first pregnancy was a miscarriage. The present pregnancy was her second pregnancy, which was an IVF conception. She was referred to BFMC in view of anomaly scan showing bilateral cleft lip and palate. NT scan done elsewhere was reported normal. She came to us at 20 weeks 6 days, which showed bilateral cleft lip and palate. On left side it was 2.2 mm and right 3.2 mm. No other structural abnormalities were noticed. Normal uterine artery Doppler and cervical length was present. As the isolated cleft lip and palate is a non-lethal abnormality which can be corrected with multiple surgeries, followed with the speech therapy, which has got good prognosis. Also, it can be associated with chromosomal and genetic anomalies. In view of this, invasive testing was advised. The couple opted for the same, underwent amniocentesis. Fish came as negative for major chromosomes. Microarray was normal. DNA storage was done. The couple continued the pregnancy and delivered at 37 weeks, 1-day gestation of a healthy baby of 2.6 kg. Bilateral cleft lip and palate was confirmed. Baby underwent corrective surgery at 3 months of age. Now it is 1 year, 3 months old and is doing well.
Now, there are certain defects which can look pretty scary on the scan. You know, you saw the defect which looked so huge, but in this particular case, the parents decided that they would like to continue the pregnancy if there were no associated chromosomal or genetic disorders. And of course, postnatal management plays a huge role, because it's very important that the postnatal surgeon or the plastic surgeon does a good job so that the child has a good good effect of the postnatal surgery, because then all your efforts are gifted as well. What I find very useful is to just send them across and to the plastic surgeons and discuss the postnatal management. And of course, this helps them to understand that there are other babies, other children who have these similar problems, and they have also been managed well. And of course, very, very importantly, financial preparation is very important, because as I already described, that they are they have to spend out of their pockets. And if they are better prepared, I think the acceptance of the child with an abnormality is much better. And the financial preparation also will help them ensure that they are, doing the right things for their baby. And of course, they can do all their shopping and homework before the child is born. And mental preparation, particularly in these cases for the mother, to be able to see their child, mother and father, of course, to see their child with a defect that is so obvious on the surface and accept it, and to be able to be prepared in terms of feeding, etc., will go a long way in giving good outcome in the long run to these babies, right? So we'll move on to case 5 with Lakshmi.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Lakshmi Rathod. The next case is 27-year-old, primary gravida, spontaneous conception, non-consanguineous marriage. She was referred to us in view of bilateral hydronephrosis at 19 weeks. Indeed, there was a bilateral hydronephrosis measuring 10 and 12 millimeters on both sides, and kidney appeared enlarged as well. The first trimester screening showed low risk, and the couple were explained regarding possibility of aneuploidies and possibility of renal tract anomalies. The follow-up scans showed that the pelvic diameter kept on increasing and fetal growth was within the normal range. And the amniotic fluid reduced in the third trimester. She had C-section at 36 weeks, 2.8 kg baby was doing well after birth, and the postnatal scan showed a cystic kidney on one side and multicystic dysplastic kidney on other side.
Yeah. Now, I think again, coming to this case, renal pelvic dilatation, majority of them will do well. In fact, even with renal pelvic dilation of 10-12 millimeters in the mid-trimester scan, either it could be a hydronephrosis, PUJ obstruction, or a vesicourethral reflux, both of which will have tend to have good outcome in the long run. In this particular case, the one kidney had packed up because which was dysplastic as well. However, the other kidney, if looked after well, is likely that the baby might do well. But again, very important that these couple are being counseled regarding the need for long-term follow-up, because then they follow up properly and give much better outcomes to these children. Now, coming to renal pelvic dilatation, bilateral renal pelvic dilatation especially, we know is a marker for aneuploidies with a likelihood ratio of 1. So it's important to look for other markers for aneuploidies as well, and other markers for aneuploidies as well. I've got one more case of renal and kidney, and then we will come back to the other things that is associated with renal pelvis. Okay, Lakshmi, you want to continue with that?
Yes, ma'am. The next case is 28 years old, primary gravida, spontaneous conception, non-consanguineous marriage, gestational diabetes, and was on diet control. She was referred to BFMC in view of bilateral hydronephrosis and hyperechogenic fetal bowel at 20 weeks. There was indeed bilateral hydronephrosis measuring 9.5 and 5.8 on both sides. However, the kidneys appeared normal in size. So the second trimester quad was already done and showed low risk. So we discussed the possibility of aneuploidies as well as renal tract anomalies. The follow-up scans showed that AP diameter remains stable and the fetal growth was within the normal range. She had a C-section at 37 week, 3.4 kg baby, doing well and the hydronephrosis was confirmed on a postnatal scan also. They are on follow-up scan 6 monthly now.
Okay, so majority of the renal anomalies are non-lethal. Okay, now whether the non-lethality will translate into low morbidity or high morbidity is only time will say. As in first case, you saw that the amniotic fluid went down. And amniotic fluid is a surrogate marker for fetal urine production, right? Because amniotic fluid is nothing but the baby's urine, especially after 20 weeks. So if the amniotic fluid goes down, there is some amount of amniotic fluid that is not being produced. Now, this could be because of a renal anomaly, or it could be conservation of blood to the kidneys, as in what happens in fetal growth restriction. So, but having said that, this is only a surrogate marker. And I say it's a surrogate marker because when I talk to pediatric urologists, they don't agree to it that what we predict antenatally is what happens postnatally as well. Sometimes we see huge big hydronephrosis antenatally, and postnatally they do well. Sometimes, particularly the vesicourethral reflux grade 3, grade 4, that turns out to be grade 3, grade 4 in the mid-trimester anomaly scan can look very, very mild and not necessary. So with renal anomalies, although they are non-lethal, one has to be watchful, and again, follow-up is extremely important. And what I always tell that even if you find one incidence of mild hydronephrosis in the mid-trimester, postnatally, they still need to do a scan and consider referral to a pediatric urologist antenatally itself, because then once they get in touch with the pediatric urologist, they are kind of in the system, if you know what I mean, and the postnatal follow-up is more channelized and structured to the and catered to the needs of the baby. And many of these renal anomalies can be sorted postnatally with good surgical outcomes. So again, because the importance of postnatal follow-up is so emphatic in these cases, I prefer that they meet the pediatric urologist somewhere around the 30-34 weeks window, so that one is they know what is happening to the kidneys during the course of pregnancy, which will also be helpful to the pediatric urologist. So again, good liaison, good teamwork will go a long way in optimizing outcomes for these babies. Okay, sorry. So our case 7, Jagruti, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. I'm Dr. Jagruti. My case is 30-year-old primary gravida, spontaneous conception, non-consanguineous marriage, family history of hypertension and diabetes present. And the first trimester screening, which was done, reported normal. She was referred to BFMC for anomaly scan in view of echogenic kidneys and bilateral choroid plexus cysts. We did a scan at 20 weeks, and the kidneys indeed appeared echogenic and measured on 90th centile. Renal pelvises were normal. Urinary bladder was also normal. Liquor was normal with an AY of 12.7. Choroid plexus cysts, which was seen before, were not seen on that scan. So we counseled the couple that echogenic kidneys could be due to chromosomal abnormalities, genetic syndromes, or fetal infections, and counseled them for amniocentesis, and they opted for the same. And the sample was sent for FISH for major chromosomes, microarray, and toxo-CMV PCR. So FISH result came normal, and microarray result, it was also normal. However, the long contiguous stretch of homozygosity was noted on the long arm of chromosome 15, and in this region, 2 genes, namely FA and WDR73, showed a renal phenotype. So in view of this, genetic consultation was recommended, and they in genetic consultation they were advised for follow-up scans for every 4 weeks. And as she was already 25 plus weeks, the guarded prognosis was explained, and postnatal evaluation of the baby was suggested. The outcome is she delivered a girl baby of 3 kg at term, and postnatally a couple of NICU admissions were there for the baby, and it was diagnosed genetic studies by genetic studies as autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease, and the baby succumbed after 1 month. This is a postnatal exome sequencing of the baby, wherein because of bilateral enlarged kidneys and high creatinine and urea, it was done, which showed autosomal recessive polycystic kidney disease. Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to highlight the reason why I put up the study is because there is a way how we can assess the kidneys in these situations. Because when we see echogenic kidneys, echogenic is nothing but it just is an ultrasound or sonographic description. Now, echogenic means it's just brighter or as bright as the bone. Normally the echogenicity of the kidneys is not much. So if you have a kidney that looks bright or looks very obvious, it could be a normal kidney, it could be a kidney that could be associated with autosomal recessive condition or polycystic disease, it could be a multicystic dysplastic kidney, or it could even be a adult polycystic kidney disease. So there are many variations of this, and it can be associated with chromosomal abnormalities and genetic abnormalities. So we did a small study in BFMC a couple of years ago, looking at a scoring system to prognosticate fetal echogenic kidneys. What we did is we looked at the laterality, whether it is unilateral or bilateral. We looked at the renal size. We looked at the evaluation of the bladder, either normal, small, large, or absent. Looked at the amniotic fluid and associated anomalies, and we gave them a score accordingly. So we had about 114 pregnancies, and out of which 111 qualified to carry on. There were 75 of them which terminated the pregnancy. So our incidence of termination was much higher, of course, because for very, again, obvious reasons, because we know that the moment you say something is not okay on the kidney, and it becomes a little bit unpredictable at times. Many parents go around shopping here and there, and then land up with terminations. Right now, we had 36 live births, which is 1/3 of these pregnancies. And so what we did is we went back and gave a score of based on the kidney size. A normal score would be 1. If it was bilateral, it would be 2. Unilateral, 1. Bladder size, if it was normal, would be 1, but if it was too small or too large, would go 2. If there was a discrepancy in amniotic fluid, it would go 2, and associated anomalies 2. So we gave a scoring system to these, and the operator was obviously blinded to the outcome of these pregnancies. So she sat and scored the entire 114 pregnancies, and then we opened up the outcome to the person who was scoring them. So we said, okay, 4 out of 10 score is a good score, 10 out of 10 would be a bad score, right? So we had to have a minimum threshold for the score. Now, when we looked at 4, 5, 6, and there was a clear-cut, demarcation there that when the score was 7 or above, the chances of a poor neonatal outcome was much higher, and when the score was 6 or less than that, the chances of a good outcome was much higher. So there was a clear-cut kind of demarcation around the mark of 6, 7, where we had much better outcomes with the lower scores and poorer outcomes with the higher scores. So less than 6, there were 34 out of the 36 live births. There were 36 live births in this cohort, of which 34 of them had a score less than 6. There were only 2 babies that had a score of more than 6. And majority, 35 of the 36, had postnatal renal scans, which confirmed multicystic polycystic kidneys and normalization of the echogenicity as well. There was only 1 neonatal death that happened due to respiratory distress, and we don't know whether that was a renal cause or not. I would think it is unlikely to be a renal cause, because this happened soon after delivery, like within 4 hours. Usually the renal deaths happen a few days later because of the rising creatinine, etc. Right? So when we looked at those babies which had an adverse outcome, there were 2 of them. 1 live birth is still under follow-up, and then there was 1 neonatal death there as well. But majority of them terminated because either it was a bilateral enlarged disease or with absent bladder or oligoamnios. So I think this is a nice way of kind of getting into it objectively, say that which are the ones that are likely to do well. And this kind of this we are now in the process of evaluating it prospectively in our setup as well. Now, unilateral disease with a normal bladder, amniotic fluid, absence of associated anomalies will obviously tend to have a favorable outcome. Even unfortunately, with there is a high incidence of termination, even though there are favorable signs, and that is where I think all of us need to come together to try and see if we can make a difference for those babies which are striving to come into this world with minor issues and how we can deal with those. We need to have an objective method for evaluating fetal echogenic kidneys, and it is really the need of the hour. And we are now, as I said, evaluating this prognostic scoring in a prospective study to confirm our findings. And of course, this is very helpful in counseling parents as well. So with that, I would move on to our next case. Aarti?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Aarti. My next case is Mrs. AB, 28-year-old, second gravida. Previous one, spontaneous miscarriage she had at 10 weeks. She is married to her first cousin, consanguineously married. She was referred to BFMC at 24 weeks in view of suspected CPAM. And first trimester screening was done somewhere else, which showed low risk. And on our imaging findings, there was a CPAM of the right lung, which was microcystic variety, the largest cyst measuring more than 2 centimeter. And the CPAM volume ratio was 0.32 centimeter squared. And there was no evidence of high drops on scan. And the amniotic fluid was normal. These are the imaging findings. And we counseled the couple, this pregnancy has a favorable prognosis as the CVR ratio was more than 0.16. And we also advised them to have a serial growth scans in order to monitor the size of the cyst and also to look for any evidence of high drops or polyhydramnios in the future pregnancy. The mother had a subsequent scans at some other center and the size of the cyst remained stable. And this pregnancy had an outcome. It was a live birth, cesarean section at 38 weeks, baby boy 3.2 kg. The boy is 11-month-old now, and the postnatal CT scan was done at 3rd month of age, which showed a right lower lobe segmental CPAM. The diagnosis was confirmed, and the postnatal course was uneventful. Thank you, ma'am.
I think, again, CPAM, although, if you actually look at those images, it looks pretty horrendous because the heart is completely shifted to one side and there's a huge big cystic areas in the lung. So it looks pretty scary on the scan. But we must understand once we have made the diagnosis of CPAM or a bronchopulmonary sequestration, BPS, which also has a similar prognosis. On right side, I would be a little bit more worried because if a right-sided CPAM, I always like to get an MRI also done to ensure that it is a CPAM and not a right-sided diaphragmatic hernia, because the echogenicity of the liver and the lung can be very similar, especially in mid-pregnancy. So once you're confident of the diagnosis of a CPAM or a bronchopulmonary sequestration, you know that this is a developmental lung anomaly, and the chances of this resolving is very, very high. Of course, like everything else, you would look for any additional anomalies, and fortunately, it is not hugely dependent on the type of CPAM, micro, macro, or mixed. Macro, of course, you can have large cystic areas that can look horrendous, but not necessarily as horrendous. And very, very rarely, to be honest, you need to do an intervention to empty the cyst. Now, the prognosis will obviously be guided by the presence or absence of additional anomalies. And of course, whenever we find an anomaly, we need to look out for certain other indices. Like in the echogenic kidneys, I said, look out for the bladder, look out for the amniotic fluid, etc. In this, they do what we call as a CVR volume. So where they look at the three-dimensional measurements of the CPAM and calculate a ratio with the head circumference, and that CVR, if it is more than 0.16, then those are likely to be of good prognosis. Now, again, the CV and how do you calculate the CVR? There are again online perinatal calculators, and you can use the perinatal calculator online and check the check for these additional aids, and that would be very helpful in counseling. And again, when it comes to CPAM or certain other anomalies, we must also remember, because this is a developmental anomaly, there is a chance that these particularly CPAM, I tell them beforehand that there is a chance that before 30 weeks, you will not see a difference. Although we monitor them, every 4 to 6 weekly on serial scans, we tell them that up to 30 weeks, it is unlikely to change. On the other hand, it will actually increase in size also, right? So that they don't go into a panic. And the reason why we are following up every 4 to 6 weeks is primarily looking for possibility of developing height drops and things like that. And of course, if the baby develops height drops, then the chances of intrauterine death are so much higher, right? And you don't have to unnecessarily terminate these pregnancies because majority of them will not have problems, to be very honest, right? And of course, postnatal follow-up is very important because one is, of course, we are building our library of these so-called non-lethal anomalies, or the babies which show certain things on the scan but end up in good favorable outcomes, and the parents are actually very happy that they gave their baby a chance. And secondly, it is also good learning point for us that not everything that looks horrendous on the scan will actually turn out to be horrible as well postnatally. So it is very motivating for us to see these kind of pretty pictures of the baby who are doing well in spite of things at one point not looking so great on the scan. So Ridhima, can you take us to the next couple of cases, please?
The next case is a 32-year-old spontaneous conception, non-consanguineous marriage. She's a fourth gravida. She has a girl child who delivered vaginally, 3.2 kg, doing well, followed by 2 terminations. And this is her fourth pregnancy in which she was referred to BFMC in view of an increased second trimester quadruple risk, 1 in 50 for trisomy 21. We did an early anomaly scan for her, which showed echogenic intracardiac focus and a hyper-echogenic wobble. In view of these markers and increased risk, the couple was given the options of NIPT and invasive testing. The couple decided to go for invasive testing. We did an amniocentesis for her and sent the sample for microarray. The result was a normal karyotype. She delivered a male baby at term, which was healthy, 3.7 kg. The baby is doing well now.
Now, why do I call this a non-lethal anomaly? Now, it's a blood test. The baby otherwise looks all right with an EIF and echogenic kidneys. The reason being because, unfortunately, in our country, we all are aware that many of the times, just based on the blood test, pregnancies are terminated, right? Just because it's a high risk and they do not want to do an invasive test, or they, just think that the invasive test will cost them money. But I think it costs more money to get pregnant, terminate this pregnancy and get pregnant again, because you have no idea what's coming in the next pregnancy. And many times it may not necessarily be something nice. Unfortunately. So we must understand that second trimester serum screening, or the quadruple test, is the standard test. We should get rid of double marker, we should get rid of triple marker test in the second trimester completely. Go for the quadruple marker, which is probably the best detection rate compared to the other two, 75% with the 5%. And if you add on a good genetic sonogram, then it improves the detection rate to almost 85%, which is very close to your first trimester combined test. Of course, when you add ultrasound to the quadruple marker, it increases the presence. If you have markers on the scan, right, of course, the efficacy of the quadruple test will go down because ultrasound is a better assessment, it gives you better risk assessment compared to a serum screening, because serum, you remember the quadruple marker hormones, the AFP, beta, HCG, inhibin, and estriol are coming actually from the placenta. It's a placental secretion, and therefore, if you're looking at fetus, you're more concentrating on ultrasound rather than the placenta. Now, if the karyotype comes out to be normal, we know that you need to look out for situations of placental dysfunction, primarily fetal growth restriction. Now, there is another result that you may get from a serum screening is a raised AFP. Now, raised AFP, it's very important that we look for neural tube defects and open fetal defects, where the skin of the baby is open, like an exomphalos, like a gastroschisis, or ventral wall defects, etc. So once you have excluded fetal structural anomalies, then again it becomes non-lethal, as in they require serial growth scans to assess the growth of the baby, because we know raised AFP can be associated with fetal growth restriction as well. Okay, so that's that. So with this is probably going to be our last case scenario.
Next case is a 26 years old primary gravida, non-consanguineous marriage. She was referred to BFMC in view of a flexion deformity in feet at 19 weeks. On scan, the bilateral telepiece was confirmed, but the rest of the fetal anatomy was normal. Also, the fetal biometry was corresponding to the gestational age. In view, we did offer an invasive testing to her because of increased association with trisomy 18, but we also explained to her that this is a non-lethal condition and surgical correction may be required postnatally. Antenatal consultation with a pediatric orthopedic surgeon was also done. We referred her to a support group of parents of babies born with similar condition. She delivered a male baby, 2.7 kg. Bilateral telepiece was confirmed at birth. Percutaneous Achilles endotomy was done, and the rest of this managed conservatively with Ponseti method and special shoes which the baby boy wears at night time only. The baby is doing well now. Thank you.
Again, I think this is a very encouraging thing because this is how the baby looked at birth, and a few days later, many parents actually happily share these images. And I think over a period of time, what we have managed to do is we have managed to build a parent, parent support group where, one set of parents support the other set of parents. So once you've excluded other problems, then many of these actually will have a good outcome as well. So reason why we do also invasive testing in certain situations is we don't want any additional nasty surprises, particularly when the baby needs surgical correction. So one may argue that why do you need, isolated cleft lip palate, isolated talipes? Why do you need to do a invasive testing? The reason why I would suggest that we still need to do an invasive testing, particularly in the era of microarray, is that you don't want any other surprises because the parents have got enough to deal with one surgical problem. And this actually encourages many parents to continue the pregnancy as well. So antenatal consultation with postnatal specialists goes a long way in preparing the parents. And of course, parent support groups can be built over a period of time. And I'm sure all of us have many parents who are very thankful to us for having allowed them to continue the pregnancy and give birth to, with small ups and downs, give birth to babies which needed some initial care, and then of course eventually did well. And I don't think I'm going to go for that. Okay, well, we have done that. You might as well go for it. Come on.
Okay, ma'am. So this case is a 31 years old primary gravida, IVF conception, non-consanguineous marriage. She was referred to BFMC in view of DCDA twin pregnancy with increased nuchal translucency, thickness, and reversal of A wave in DV in twin 2. On scan, there was a fetal hydrops in twin 2 with an absent nasal bone and fetal tachycardia and ductus venous agenesis. And there was increased risk for fetal chromosomal anomalies in twin 2, for which we had given her the couple the following options of double CVS. Second option was fetal reduction of twin 2 with CVS of twin 1 and fetal reduction of twin 2 only, and or to continue the pregnancy with no intervention. The couple opted for option 2, that is fetal reduction for twin 2 and CVS of twin 1. The CVS result shows normal karyotype of twin 1. We also requested a FISH on the amniotic fluid of twin 2 and which showed trisomy 18.
Okay, so the reason, we may ask that, double CVS, why? You could have just done a CVS of the baby which was growth restricted. But again, particularly in twin pregnancy, we must remember that although they come from different placenta, dichorionic twins, but about 20% of the dichorionic twins could be monozygotic. That means the starting point of these babies, that is the starting egg and the sperm, is the same one, and then they split before 3 days, and therefore they become dichorionic. Okay, so 20% of them could be monozygotic, so they could share the same DNA. However, the phenotype could be different. Now, this happened to be trisomy 18, but if it's Down syndrome, you can have a Down syndrome which is hydropic, but at the same time, you can have a Down syndrome which will look completely normal on the scan. And therefore, it is very important to test them both to ensure that what you are continuing, especially more so, I believe, when you're doing a fetal reduction, the pregnancy that is continuing is also healthy and does not have any problems. So although it looks normal and non-lethal in a way, to ensuring that that baby is otherwise also normal genetically as well, is or your chromosome wise, it's very important. Now, summarize, what have we learned from all these things? It's something that then you have a so-called non-lethal anomalies. One is, you have to have your definition of what is non-lethal for you, because what is non-lethal for you could be a high morbidity or a low morbidity, whether it is socially or whether it is financially for the parents, right? But before we come to that point of view, it's very important to look for additional anomalies, because, so-called any anomaly for that matter can be associated with certain other anomalies. And not all anomalies are dangerous for the mother or the baby. In fact, majority of the fetal anomalies are not dangerous for the mother at all, right? And many of the fetal anomalies are not lethal in utero, right? So it is good practice, especially when we need to do a surgery for the child after birth, or if it requires rehabilitation, etc. We consider assessing for aneuploidies and genetic anomalies, because we still have a large genetic abnormality pool in our society. I think it is absolutely crucial to refer them to a postnatal specialist to help to decide to what extent they are willing to do treatment for their child. Because if they're willing, if they want to continue the pregnancy, they should be able to give a good life to the child as well. And many parents will actually would like to give it a try, right? And parent support groups are absolutely very, very helpful, because when a parent talks to another parent, I find they talk to them in a much more sensitive way and in their language, which is very important for the parents. And of course, from our point of view, I think a good postnatal follow-up and our own bookkeeping, diary keeping for these anomalies is very useful, because that's the only way we can really learn. And of course, I would never say the learning process is ever complete. It's an ongoing process, and the more and more that we do, the more and more we learn about parents' attitude and how to do your best to the parents and leave the rest to the Almighty, of course. So with that, I will end it here. I'm happy to take in any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, can you please stop the screen share, Dr. Pratima?
Yeah, I will.
Thank you. Yeah, you wanted to show something, some announcement?
No, well, that's okay.
I thought the last slide showed some announcement.
No, don't worry, sorry.
Yeah, Namrita? Unmute.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I would like to say thank you so much, Prati. It is always to hear you, and I would say that you are key person.
Not at all.
And no, for me, yes, you are. I have learned so much from you, and thankful to you.
That's
so I would like to, we have learned about 10 non-lethal anomalies, getting increased NT to equivocal or absent nasal bone, then where there was increased risk of 13 bilateral cleft lip palate and nephrosis, hyperechogenic bowels, echogenic kidneys, CPAM, isolated EIF, and bilateral talipus. Reversal of A-wave in fetal hydrops in all the anomalies. And out of that, what we can come to the conclusion that it is always better to go ahead with a proper early anomaly scan, detailed anomaly scan at 19 weeks, fetal echo scan, which helps you come down to a conclusion. And after is better than NIPT after all, and the required FISH microarray exome sequencing. And in the I have to add what you have already said, that scary scans need you always, and horrendous looks of the scan shouldn't allow you to give your baby a chance. So you have to evaluate the baby, and all the likelihood ratios have to be taken into consideration, and then you come down to a conclusion, continue with the pregnancy or not. Thank you so much, Prati. Now over.
Dr. Pratima, if you will allow us just 2 minutes, we have some announcements to make. Swada, can you please share so that
Yes,
Dr. Rajasi can make the announcements?
Yes,
Because
ma'am.
people have been posting their details in the chat box. So I think there's some confusion. So we'll make the announcements quickly. Rajasi? Rajasi?
I think ma'am is not there, ma'am.
Okay, no problem. So some of you were posting your details in the chat box. Please take a quick screenshot of this announcement.
Yeah.
Those of you who want to avail the MMC and ICOG credit points, please send your name, registration number, email ID, and phone number to any one of these two numbers. Quickly take a screenshot so that we'll save time. And please don't post your details in the chat box. We cannot retrieve the chat later to send you all the details. So please take a screenshot and then send a message. And next announcement,
ma'am.
please. Yeah, this is our number, our NOGS office number. If any one of you wants to receive further notifications about our future DigiOGAN CMEs, please send your name and number to this message. WhatsApp your name to this number and please tell us that you want to be added to our broadcast list. So this is our NOGS office number. I hope you've taken a screenshot quickly. Thank you so much. Swada, you can stop sharing.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. So Pratima, can I start the questions?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, fire away.
One of the outstanding sessions, Dr. Pratima, I must say.
Thank you.
I mean, with this flooding of, we call this webinaritis pandemica. With the pandemics of webinars, everywhere the attendance is dwindling. But we at DigiOGAN have huge numbers. Even today, we had close to 300 people joining in for your session because you were the faculty today and the topic was so interesting.
Thanks
so thank you so much once again. I'll quickly start with the question and answer session. I had requested actually not to post questions earlier, but there are a few questions which were there before. I'll just quickly take them. Yeah. What is for asymmetric ventricles? What do you do for asymmetric ventricles and termination of pregnancy? I don't get this question. If you
basically asymmetric ventricle, you're talking about one side ventricle is about 3 and the other side ventricle about 7, 8, right? If you have asymmetric ventricles and rest of the brain looks normal, right? If it is not more than 10 millimeters, then you really don't need to worry about it. Just ignore it. If you have anything in the brain, even mild ventriculomegaly, unless it is bilateral, it is not of that significance because unilateral ventriculomegaly, unilateral asymmetric ventriculomegaly tends to have good prognosis in the presence of a normal brain. Now there are proper ways of assessing the fetal brain by doing a detailed neurosonogram. So if you're worried, do a detailed neurosonogram, and if your neurosonogram is normal, then I don't think you need to worry about asymmetric ventricles.
Right. Dr. Mitra ma'am is asking you
10 to 12 mm ventricles, many of them tend to have normal outcomes.
Okay. Dr. Mitra ma'am has asked you, unfortunately, parents with only severe bilateral CTEV have opted for termination. What should have been the optimum counseling, the test, and plan for next pregnancy?
I think we've already covered a case of CTEV.
I think I missed that.
What problem happens is, sometimes we doctors, we become judgmental about parents, right? We can handle a CTEV because we just tell them you have to go do this, do that. But when you actually sit down and talk to parents about how they go through that whole process of not just, one is to visualize the baby with this abnormality that is right screaming in front of your eyes. Then there is a social network there as well. And then you have to have surgery, and then you have to have the postnatal care, and then you have to have before that. So almost 2 years of their life is completely engrossed in actually working towards making that baby walk properly. So that grit and that this thing has to come. And of course, it comes with a lot of motivation. So some parents, about 20% of parents, will still go and have termination of pregnancy, not because they don't like the baby or they don't want the baby, but I think they just cannot cope with that.
Right.
They don't.
They can't.
They don't agree.
Unfortunately, we can't do anything about it because we have no support system from a healthcare or a public healthcare system. A public healthcare system does nothing for us.
Right. Dr. Vandana Pandit is asking you, how would you counsel for a baby who's detected with absent cerebellar vermis with other tests normal?
See, if the cerebellar vermis is absent, agenesis of the cerebellar vermis, and it depends really what other tests you have done, right? Now, an absent cerebellar vermis is a bad one, right? Although the baby may live, there is a high probability that this baby could have a genetic problem, right? Now, I would presume that you have done a microarray and the microarray is normal, but microarray does not cover the entire genetic spectrum of problems that can be associated with the agenesis of cerebellum, right? So I would say that this goes beyond the level of, it may not be lethal, but it has got a very high morbidity, right? I would say that what would be important for this pregnancy with a cerebellar hypoplasia or a cerebellar agenesis particularly is to do a detailed, evaluation of that fetus, particularly in the genetic way, and even store DNA as in when is required, and work with the geneticist and see whether you can help them in the next pregnancy, because the morbidity of such a condition will be quite high.
Right. This is a question from Dr. Shruti. Once double marker is normal and a normal NT scan, do we have to do a quadruple marker again? Is it necessary? If yes, in which conditions?
No, if you have a good low risk combined test, right? Now, there is no need to evaluate again and again the same baby for the same conditions, right? Now, I would say that, the general guidelines now with the advent of NIPT, now if the risk is less than 1 in 1,000, or some studies quote 1 in 2,000, of course, there is no validation for these numbers. If it is less than 1 in 2,000, there is no further evaluation that is required, because the number of chromosomal abnormalities that you would miss is far and few. So if you have a good first trimester combined test, I think that takes care of aneuploidies to a large extent.
Right. Ma'am, what's your experience of neurodevelopment in babies with CHDs?
In congenital heart disease, the risk of my experience is, I cannot say really, because most of our congenital heart defects actually go and terminate the pregnancy, right? And that is a fact. Majority of them do terminate, not because they don't want to have the baby, but because the surgical morbidity and, the whole thing about the cardiac thing can be quite troublesome. Although cardiac surgery in our country is very, very advanced, in fact, much more advanced than many other countries as well. So I think the morbidity will be slightly higher. Neurodevelopmental delays would be slightly higher, even in the absence of a genetic problem with a cardiac defect. Of course, if there is a genetic problem with a cardiac defect, it will be much higher. Even if it is absent, there are some studies which have shown that because there is a heart defect, the blood flow to the brain is erratic, and that can cause some neuronal problems. But although I don't have, figures off my head to, put something to it.
Right. Now, 3 questions on prognosis of 3 problems: choroid plexus cyst, myelocele, and echogenic bowel. Prognosis in
plexus cyst, again, I go back to the saying, if it's a choroid plexus cyst, go back, look at your previous screening test, look at whether there's any structural abnormality in the baby, and if there is nothing else wrong with the baby, and otherwise you've got a good first trimester screening, or even a second trimester screen for that matter, I think you can comfortably ignore isolated choroid plexus cyst. But before I say that, I would always say that as an obstetrician, because again, the standard of scanning is so variable, it is absolutely good practice to take a second opinion, right? Just to make sure that 2 people have agreed on the findings, right? Only because, it's not uncommon for us to say, but the baby was completely normal, and 2 weeks later, you're saying that there is a problem. I would say then and there, just to get another opinion, play it safe. There is no need to be worried about. Second, myelocele, a spina bifida. I did not deliberately touch upon spina bifida, because we all know open spina bifida, as there is injury to the spinal cord and the morbidity is significantly high. For me, the bigger challenge, although you can surgically correct it, the bigger challenge will be actually rehabilitation. How do we rehabilitate these babies? Many of them will have bladder bowel incontinence, and they're left with bladder bowel incontinence for life. They need ventricular shunts, which will need to be changed regularly as the child grows. And there is, infection risk and things like that. So I would be very cautious about spina bifidas and surgery for spina bifidas. The third one was what?
Echogenic bowel.
Echogenic bowel. Yeah, echogenic bowel, again, majority of the echogenic bowels are normal. And I think a good follow-up, ensuring that they're, looking for a good risk assessment for aneuploidies, ensuring follow-up because echogenic bowel can be a marker for growth restriction. Echogenic bowel can be a marker for bowel obstructions as well. So a good follow-up scan every 4 to 6 weeks is a good practice.
Right. How would you justify termination in renal issues with favorable prognosis? Even if the parents decide for termination, is it ethically justified? What's your
I can't
opinion?
justify it. I mean, I'm nobody to justify it. I mean, it is the parents' decision. They will do it. And even if you, whatever you say, I mean, you cannot disagree with the parents, because at the end of the day, they are the prime caretaker for the child.
True.
Right? So it's not for us to sit there and justify what they are doing. They have to justify their own actions. And many parents, believe me, will have long-term guilt feelings about termination of pregnancy. Even, 6 weeks pregnancy, when moms terminate, they come and tell us that I terminated a pregnancy at 6 weeks, right? So it's not easy for them mentally also. I mean, I think there is no justification, and we are nobody to justify. They are responsible for their actions, and they should take responsibility for it.
So true, yeah. How to counsel parents in cases of thoracic scoliosis in absence of other structural anomalies? Parents belong to low socioeconomic strata.
As I said, low socioeconomic status itself is a highly morbid condition, right? Because it's not only about the money, but society-wise and social-wise, and many of these mothers are actually put in a situation saying, because of you only there is a problem in the baby, right? So I think again, thoracic scoliosis is probably nothing very troublesome, but remember, although some of these scoliosis and kyphoscoliosis have shown that postnatally they have picked up a spina bifida in them as well, a closed or an open, which you may or may not pick up on the scan as well. So if the scoliosis is severe, I would be watchful. If it's a single hemivertebra, then that is not a problem. But if there is multiple hemivertebra, there could be other problems associated with that as well.
The next question is NT is 2.8 at CRL 6.73. Nasal bone is present, DV normal, no TR, double marker is low risk. What should be the management? Is NIPT sufficient? Age of patient is 30, primigravida, spontaneous conception.
Well, the good thing about this situation is that you're seeing her at 13, 14 weeks, right? So if you do an NIPT, if otherwise structurally baby looks completely normal, I don't think there's any harm in doing NIPT, primarily because you have time. You have time on your side, because for me, 20 weeks is my deadline. So if I'm seeing somebody at 13, 14 weeks and they want to do NIPT, I said, fine, go ahead and do NIPT. I don't have any threshold to kind of push them into doing an invasive, even if the even if the NT is 5 millimeters, as in our case, it's okay, let them do it. And if the NIPT comes back as high risk, they will be even more convinced to do an amniocentesis, right? True. So fair enough. So you have more evidence to that. I think it's about giving options to the parents and let them decide, and you have to discuss the pros and cons. You have to tell them that an invasive test is 100% or a confirmatory test. NIPT will give you a 99% assurance, whereas the other tests are less than that. So let them decide what their level of comfort is between 100 and 99.
Right. Please give details about bilateral renal pelvic dilatation measurements and its significance.
See, I think again, 18 to 24 weeks, renal pelvic dilatation measured in the AP diameter, like how I showed you in the image. Some studies take 4 millimeters as cutoff, and we take 5 millimeters as cutoff. It's just only a millimeter difference. So anything which is more than 5 millimeters, we call them either prominent or mild renal pelvic dilatation. And this would qualify in the absence of calicial dilatation. So when you look at the coronal image, you see calicial dilatation, then even if your pelvic diameter is only 3 millimeters or 4 millimeters, you would still call them as mild renal pelvic dilatation, because remember, when there is urine inside the renal pelvis, that's when it will appear like that. The moment the baby passes urine, temporarily it can actually measure less, right? So it's a variable thing. It's a dynamic thing, right? Even that few millimeters of urine in the fetal renal pelvis will make a difference, right? So some of us say between 4 and 5, if it is there, we just call it prominent, and then we still follow up them, right? So if there is a mild renal pelvic dilatation, if it is more than 8, and again, it varies from gestational age. At 20 weeks, mid-trimester, you're looking at 5 millimeters. At 28 to 30 weeks, you're looking at 8 millimeters, and beyond 32 weeks, you're looking at 10 millimeters as your kind of cutoff, because the bigger the baby, the more urine it is going to produce. So the bigger the pelvis you will see, right? Logically, that's the way it works, right? So
Right.
if you have something like that, you would follow up. We generally have a protocol to follow up at 28 and 34 weeks. And then at 34 weeks, we would, if there is evidence of it increasing in size, we refer them to the pediatric urologist to discuss what happens postnatally, so that the follow-up is done properly.
Right, right. A scan showed unilateral choroid plexus cyst at 19 weeks, but follow-up scan is showing prominent left ventricle at 23 weeks. What is the prognosis?
I would presume it is a cerebral ventricle. I think prognosis is still by far most likely this is all right, right? Because if the baby, CPC is, of course, it can be present in Down syndrome as well, but more prominently, it's a marker for trisomy 18. The good thing about trisomy 18 is you will find a lot of abnormalities on the scan. So if there is no growth restriction, the baby is completely normally grown, and you're just having a prominent cerebral ventricle at 23 weeks, by far, I would not think it's an aneuploidy. It could either be something else, or most likely it is a normal baby as well.
Yeah. Primary 28 years, non-consanguineous marriage, IVF pregnancy, twin diamniotic dichorionic, twin 1 NT was raised along with markers, twin 2 normal. She was referred to fetal medicine specialist. Patient is opting for selective reduction. What should be the options for screening of twin 2? If patient is not willing for amniocentesis, what are the other screening options?
Well, I think if they want a reduction of the abnormal twin, it's only fair, because for two reasons. One is it is abnormal. Two is, I think a twin pregnancy always carries 5 times higher risk than a singleton pregnancy. So in a way, you are actually allowing the singleton pregnancy to have a better outcome in the absence of an abnormal twin, right? So I think it's fair. Ideally speaking, as I already mentioned in our twin case, in case 11, we went through that even dichorionic twin pregnancy, about 10 to 20% of them could be monozygotic. So yes, they should ideally screen both the babies, but there will be situations where they don't want to do, for whatever reasons, either socioeconomic reason or because their mother-in-law told them not to bother the other baby. It could be anything. And they do tend to listen to their mother-in-laws because they don't have much of an option, I guess. But I think we will always advise them what is the best course of action. And I think that's where we should all have our stand. What they would do is the choice that should be left to them. Because then, then you're optimizing the outcome for that baby. Optimizing an outcome is not always not to do a termination or to do a termination. Optimizing an outcome is to do what the parents are able to do to give that fetus or that baby a good life.
True. Right. Limited meningocele, how to counsel?
What is limited meningocele?
Exactly. I thought I'm not aware of this term, so I thought must be something, some new terminology.
Meningocele is a meningocele. I mean,
I don't know what is it. Yeah. Dr. Sindhu, if you can read.
You will need to kind of still do the postnatal surgery, and there is a risk of injury to the thing, and I would seek the advice of a neurosurgeon.
Right. Dr. Sindhu, you can repost your question. A scan showed CP cyst and pylectasis. How to counsel?
Both are again like simple markers. Again, pylectasia is again, you're looking at more like urinary tract obstruction. CPC, you're looking like more like trisomy 18. I would go back and see what is the screening that they have done. Have they done a good first trimester combined test, which is giving them a low risk for chromosomal abnormalities? Discuss, you cannot exclude a chromosomal abnormality, because even if the baby look completely normal, you cannot exclude Down syndrome. Can we? None of us can exclude Down syndrome in a normal looking baby. And
yes.
If, as I said, if this baby requires surgical interventions and things like that, and it comes to a fetal medicine unit, and they say, we came and you did not tell us about this, you did not tell us about that. I think it's always good to say that, look, there is a possibility of chromosomal abnormality, but the possibility is very low. It's not no, but it is low. And if you want to do an amniocentesis, do it and be sure that it is okay. And then we carry on the pregnancy without any further hassles, and we monitor for the pelvic dilatation. That means you're monitoring for hydronephrosis and not worry about the CPC as much, right? So I think that should
Right.
That should be
Is
is
it
for any marker for that matter.
Yeah. The next question is it mandatory to do echo for all pregnancies? I think fetal, yeah.
No, I think it's important to do a basic cardiac scan for all pregnancies at all stages of pregnancy. I think that is where we stand at the moment. And echo is a detailed study of the heart, looking at taking the measurements, etc. You don't need to mandatorily do, but if you're suspicious on a basic cardiac scan, or if there are any other risk factors, then yes, you must do an echo.
Right.
IVF pregnancies again have a higher risk of cardiac effects. So see, basically echo is nothing but it forces you to look at the heart in a particular manner. The moment an obstetrician writes to me echo, I'm forced to look at the heart in even more detail, right? Now I look at the heart anyway, but you know, everybody should look at the heart anyway, right? And the more we look, the less we are likely to miss out on cardiac abnormalities. So I think you don't need to do a formal echo, but you should look at the heart in all pregnancies at all stages of pregnancy, whether it is first trimester or it's third trimester.
Right, right. Small Blake's pouch cyst with height of cerebellar vermis of 8 millimeters at 20 weeks. How do I proceed? There is no other anomaly. Quadruple is normal.
Well, if there is a small Blake's pouch cyst with no other abnormalities, I don't think there's anything to worry about. And 8 millimeter of, what is it, 8 millimeter?
Height of cerebellar vermis, 8 millimeters.
I would look into the chart. If that is normal, I would not worry about it. But Blake's pouch cysts are not known to cause any other problems. But yes, I will still follow up just to make sure that there is no other surprises in this pregnancy. Majority of them are normal. See, I think we must understand that when I keep saying majority of these babies are normal, because God made majority babies normal in spite of the doctors, right? And that's a fact, right? We should not make a disease out of nothing. Most of the times we will be right. Occasionally we will not get it right and there will be a problem, right? And I think we have to accept that we are not there to kind of, you know, be heroes and, you know, gods to the patients. Sometimes it's not that you got it wrong, but you're right in saying that 9 out of 10 will be fine, but 1 out of 10 will have a problem and you cannot always predict that one, right? And that limitation we have to understand, and the parents, we have to make the parents understand and document it.
True. Yep. How to counsel a patient with a fetus of ventricular size at atria at 17 to 18 millimeters. No evidence of esophageal atresia. Cerebellum is normal at 28 weeks.
Sorry, ventricular size of 17, 18 millimeters.
18.
That is
Cerebellum is normal at 28 weeks. And no evidence of esophageal atresia.
Did you say that ventricular size is 17 millimeters, 17 millimeters?
17-18 millimeters.
17 to 18 millimeters. So I suppose that there is bilateral ventriculomegaly, and that is a severe bilateral ventriculomegaly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So this may not be this is a very good question, because, you know, brain anomalies can be developing anomalies. There can be in utero developing anomalies, right? And ventriculomegaly can be not only because of chromosomal abnormality, 4% of them will have chromosomal abnormalities, but they can also be because of destructive brain anomalies, which can be because of infection, which can be because of genetic syndromes. So at 28 weeks, you know, you really cannot, you know, do a lot, but I think it's important to, you know, I mean, I would still suggest doing an invasive test, store the DNA, check the chromosomes, because if there is a severe abnormality that is picked up on the genetic basis, we can still approach the court and request for a termination, because the outcome for this pregnancy may not be good at all. There will be high morbidity condition. And if you can prove that the condition is very highly morbid, I don't think the courts are quite helpful, I must say that. Right, and we should approach the court more and more so that they are aware of the problems that we are facing.
Yes, even in Nagpur, we have this board in GMC Government Medical College, and they give the decision in 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah. They're very good. They're very good.
Yes.
I think the more we use the court for terminations after 20 weeks, the better, because I think we should force the courts full of these cases so that they change the law based on our
yes,
not sit and discuss in closed rooms, because that is not going to really help a lot.
Yes. The next question is from the MOC herself. Can you please opine on the case? 32 weeks pregnancy, baby has congenital diaphragmatic hernia with bowels inside the thorax. Heart pushed to midline due to mass effect, but apex still pointing to left. Stomach in abdomen, mild to moderate polyhydramnias. Does this have a good prognosis?
So are we talking about a right-sided diaphragmatic hernia because heart is pointing to the left?
Swada, you can say.
Yes, left. I think, ma'am, it is left.
Is it a left-sided diaphragmatic
Yes,
hernia or
left.
a right-sided diaphragmatic hernia?
Ma'am, it is left-sided diaphragmatic hernia.
So left-sided diaphragmatic hernia, I think I would, rather than concentrating on the diaphragmatic hernia, I would go and look at the lung. I will go and look at the right-sided lung, right?
Okay.
Now, the right-sided lung, there are measurements. Again, as I said, you have to look at the clinical aids. There is the lung to observed to expected lung to head ratio, and if the observed to expected lung to head ratio is more than 1, the outcome for these pregnancies are actually good by making sure that they're born under optimal conditions and we have got a series of babies with diaphragmatic hernia who have actually had a good outcome. So I will go back and look into the first trimester and second trimester scans. And of course, if the first and second trimester scans have been reported normal, which means that this is a late onset diaphragmatic hernia.
Yes, yes.
The hole in the diaphragm was always there, right? But it was probably small that when the growth of the intestines happened so much, it came out into the diaphragm, right? Now, which means that the lungs have not been compromised so much, right?
Okay.
Look at the liver, look at the observed lung to head ratio, and I would deliver this baby optimally at term, 38 weeks. Even if there is mild polyhedrons, don't worry about it. Deliver, because what I want is, I know for sure that this baby will require surgery. So the surgeons need a fully grown baby, a mature baby, so that they can give the best outcome for that baby.
Correct.
So 38 weeks in utero transfer, in a setup where you have the pediatric surgeons on their NICU facilities there, and then you know that you can do a good job for this baby, because what the pediatric surgeons do is they do not allow the baby to exercise its lungs. So as soon as the baby comes out, they just put the baby on the ventilator. They paralyze the baby and ventilate the baby, and then they wait for 72 hours, make sure that the baby has got good lung capacity, and then they will surgically operate this baby. And many of them do very well. It's the first 2-3 weeks that can be a bit stormy, but then overall they will pick up and they will do well.
Thank you, ma'am.
And of course, you have to make sure that there's no other abnormalities.
Yeah.
Right. How do we counsel a patient 20 weeker with single umbilical artery, no other abnormalities, quadruple normal?
Don't worry. Bring them back at 32 weeks for a scan, growth scan. That's fine, which we do anyway, no?
Yeah. Presence of an aberrant right-sided subclavian artery with no other anomalies.
Right. ARSA is a marker for chromosomal abnormalities, and it is also a marker for 22q microdeletion, although it is less frequently seen, because the 22q microdeletion itself is less frequently seen. So I would suggest, and about 1% of normal people could have ARSA. You and me could have ARSA. Who knows? We don't know. We've not done our scan. And now if I do, unless I do a CT, I will not be able to pick up an ARSA in myself. So postnatally, we are not good at picking up ARSA just by ultrasound scans. So I would say that, you go back, look at all the risk assessments that has been done. I would, straight away advise an invasive testing in this couple. Make sure the chromosomes are normal. You have to specifically ask for 22q microdeletion, because that is not covered in your routine karyotype. It is a fish for 22q microdeletion. You do a 22q microdeletion, and then if that is normal, then you would just, carry on the pregnancy with no other implications.
Right. Was the significance of septate NT?
I would think this is a cystic hygroma. A septated NT is nothing but a massively increased nuchal translucency. So you will manage that like how you would manage increased nuchal translucency. You would suggest a karyotype. You would do a, a heart evaluation, and karyotype, probably microarray is better, and I would store the DNA also. Because if you find something else later on, that would be helpful.
Are we legally justified in terminating non-lethal anomalies on the grounds of poor socioeconomic status, even though our healthcare does nothing for such babies, but they do legally stop us from termination?
I think we are not justified to decide that, to be honest, right? How does, can you say no to the patient and say, I will not terminate this pregnancy, go somewhere else? Then do that, right? I think it's all depends on the individual cases. I mean, if you're thinking about the fetus, I don't think, we are legally justified to terminate any pregnancy for that matter, because we are not gods, right? But we try to help out the parents in certain circumstances. And, you have no choice but to do so. If you feel that you don't want to terminate a pregnancy because there is something like a cleft lip palate, and because your conscience doesn't allow, like how there are some obstetricians who don't do termination of pregnancy, period, right? So I think let them sort themselves out. They have a right to life, they have a right to unfortunately the fetus has no voice. So but yes, if it is a non-lethal anomaly, I make no qualms. I make no, shortcut. No. I mean, I make it very, very clear that this is a non-lethal anomaly, and the baby is likely to do well after birth, right? And if they terminate the pregnancy in spite of telling them this, then it's their choice. I mean,
in these conditions, what is the indication for termination, ma'am? What do you write in that?
I don't write. I mean, in fact, I don't write much about termination, to be very honest. I just say the prognosis is poor or prognosis is guarded.
Right. But as an obstetrician, if she comes to me with this report and wants to terminate for whatever reasons, so we need to justify that termination. So what do we write?
Because no, I think it's a parent's wish that they want to terminate the pregnancy. And if they are within the legal limit to terminate a pregnancy less than 20 weeks, and I think, it's not unfair, or I think it's fair to listen, because at the end of the day, they are the prime caretaker. I mean, they have to deal with the morbidities that is associated with even non-lethal abnormalities, right? Suppose, I always want to say cleft lip and palate, we can treat it and we can do this, but I still have an 12-year-old who comes to me with a complete median cleft lip palate, and which has been surgically corrected, and the baby has got a terrible voice. And but the couple were very keen that they wanted to continue the pregnancy with all that. But many times I think that, have I done a favor to them or have I not? But then the child is so lovely, I feel good about seeing that child. But at the same time, when I had a couple who came to me that because of previous pregnancy, absent nasal bone, they just terminated the pregnancy. And this pregnancy, they're full of guilt feelings that, oh my God, previous pregnancy, and this time again we have absent nasal bone, right? So those ones, I think, is bad. But the parents have to live with that guilt feeling for the rest of their lives. And probably they've not gone back to the original obstetrician who actually terminated that pregnancy. So sometimes I think parents can arm twist you to do something that is not, that your heart does not allow you to do. So I think then you should have the courage to say that I will not do this termination. You go and do it with whoever else will be willing to do it.
Right. Please mention the cutoff dates for double, triple and quadruple marker studies. Triple, are we doing now? We're not doing triple.
No. Don't do triple. Please don't do triple at all. Don't do double marker in the second trimester. A quadruple marker in the second trimester is done between 15 to 19 weeks. And in the first trimester, your quadruple marker is from 35 to 84 millimeters of CR, which approximately is 10 to 13 plus 6.
Right.
But don't do double marker alone in the first or in the second trimester. Don't do triple marker in the second trimester. Go for quadruple, which has got a better accuracy.
Yes.
Right? We have to move on.
There is a patient who had 3 successive pregnancies of Down syndrome. What investigations to be done so that 4th pregnancy would be normal?
How sure are you about the Down syndrome? Right?
Dr. Lata, if you can
know whether this is a trisomy 21 or this is a translocation trisomy, or this is just a guess of Down syndrome. Because many times their parents who come say that my child has got Down syndrome, they equate every mental challenge to Down syndrome.
Right?
So you need to have a karyotype report, because 3 Down syndrome is very unusual unless there is a translocation.
Okay.
So can I have a little bit more information? Assuming that it's a translocation, you would test both the parents, and very likely one of the parents is carrying a translocation, would have it. And then you would do a CVS in the next pregnancy. That's it. Even if the baby looks normal, you would have to do a CVS.
Yes. Dr. Lata, please post these details in the chat box. Till how many weeks one twin can be terminated? I mean, reduction, I think she means to say.
See, I think a fetal reduction is not a termination of pregnancy.
Exactly.
So legally, it is not. right? And in fact, I would suggest that if there is non-lethal anomalies, or that the parents don't want to continue with one baby that has got a major heart defect and which will have a high morbidity, it is always still better to do a fetal reduction at 32 weeks and give a better outcome to the surviving baby than do it at 20 weeks in the halfway through the pregnancy, right? So because the risk of miscarriage is highest in the first 4 weeks after doing a reduction, right? So if in mid-pregnancy you're doing a fetal reduction and the baby is born at 24 weeks, then you lose the normal baby also, right? So in England, between 16 to 30 weeks, we hardly did any reductions.
Right. Till how many weeks prognosis for partial corpus callosum agenesis?
Partial corpus callosal agenesis is possibly, again, see, the corpus callosal agenesis, complete agenesis and partial agenesis is very debatable, right? Now, if you have seen a good, and even now there is another thing called corpus callosum dysgenesis. That means you've seen a good corpus callosum in the second trimester, and later on, the corpus callosum is not developing normally. These brain anomalies can be very tricky. Now, and of course, having said that, even partial agenesis of corpus callosum, many of them are missed. So you might be having a few people out there walking around, super intelligent or not, I don't know, who will have partial agenesis of corpus callosum but still be doing well. So I think if you are suspecting a partial agenesis of corpus callosum, it's important that you look for, again, other abnormalities, take the help of neurosono people. And we have to be honest and say that we don't have answers to everything. Likely, this baby will be all right, but we cannot predict the neurological outcome. Brain abnormalities are almost all of them quite difficult to predict and correlate with the antenatal findings, because things can change and change very rapidly in the brain.
Right. How are you placed, Dr. Pratima? There are still a few questions left.
I'm good.
Okay, thank you. How to evaluate an unexplained IUD at 37 weeks of a 24-year-old patient? No gestational complications throughout normal scans, no family history pertaining to this problem, and further, what is the further preconceptional diagnosis? I mean, I think.
See, I think it's very unfortunate to come to 37 weeks and have a sudden IUD. I think first thing is we have to see what is the basic things that can be seen right there, right? Simple things like birth weight, doing an external examination of the baby to see whether there's externally seen any abnormality, looking at the placenta, looking at the cord, because again, velamentous cord insertion, membranous cord insertion, cord around the neck does not kill babies. Let me be very clear, because as obstetricians, we know many times the babies are born with a cord around the neck. The babies don't breathe in utero. So there is no question of the baby being strangulated to death inside, right? So let us not go into that aspect at all. Right? So looking at an unexplained, I would not start with an unexplained IUD. I will try to explain an IUD before calling it an unexplained IUD, because many times, they just say unexplained IUD, but have you done a blood sugar test? Have you been, because we know that blood sugar test at the time of IUD probably will be normal, right? So you have to go back into the previous blood sugars, right?
And she says no gestational complications.
Well, gestation complications tested when? Tested then and there, because if you test a blood sugar at the time of death, it's likely it will be normal, right? Because when the insulin, when the blood sugar drops, that's when the babies die, right? In gestational diabetes as well, right? You will look for any possibility of blood pressure. I presume blood pressure is one of the easier things that they would not have, they would have tested. What is the birth weight of the baby, right? External examination of the baby, external examination of the placenta, external examination of the cord, looking for any true knots of the cord, etc. as well, right? Now, autopsy is always a good thing to do. If not, at least do a placental histopathology, right? Sometimes you might find some answers there, right? And if all these have been tested and they are all tested normal, then in about 40 to 50% of times you can have, we did a study actually when I was working in Liverpool, we looked at all the term IUDs, and this is what we found, that 40 to 50% of them can remain unexplained. And that's when you would call them an unexplained IUD, right? And if that is the case, what best you can do in the next pregnancy is just optimize the outcome. I would not, if there is no evidence of growth restriction, if there is no evidence of R+ syndrome, etc., then why I would not give them unnecessarily heparin injections, and because those cause maternal morbidities. So
Yes.
I think I would just make sure that the next pregnancy care is optimized by ensuring that they have all the care given at the right time in the right manner, and most of them will not happen again. Right? What I tell parents, accidents happen. They don't happen again and again. Right? Certain times luck is not on our side. We have to accept it.
Yes, so true. Stomach bubble seen only after waiting on each antenatal scan. But amniotic fluid is normal. Is there any chance of esophageal atresia?
Not atresia, but you can have a partial web. But if there is a atresia, then certainly you should have increased amniotic fluid. But if you have, one of these tracheoesophageal fistulas, you can still have a normal amniotic fluid with a small stomach bubble, or a normal stomach bubble, even for that matter. So I would be cautious and just say that, before you feed the baby, pass AMG tube. But again, tracheoesophageal fistula are, treated very well by the surgeons. And if you just have a high index of suspicion, majority of these babies will be normal.
Right. Prognosis for isolated Hirschsprung's disease, karyotype is normal.
Isolated, how did you diagnose Hirschsprung's disease? I suppose that it is Hirschsprung's disease is most of the times a postnatal diagnosis, not an antenatal diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. So this is
Don't
Dr.
diagnose them antenatally.
Named as Victoria, so maybe you can post that clarification in the chat box. Is there any chart or a ready reckoner to make these things clear, like what to do in which anomaly? So I think she wants a ready reckoner. So if there is an
ready reckoner for?
To make things clear, like what to do in which anomaly.
I think my last slide did that, isn't it?
Yeah.
You want me to show that slide again to you? I could do that.
Yeah, please.
I should just look for additional anomalies. If you can do a karyotype or a microarray, do that. Get postnatal, get involvement of the postnatal specialist who's going to be looking after those abnormalities, and take help from the fetal medicine specialist. Always good to work as
always better. Yes. Gravida 4 P2+1 13 weeks pregnancy. Ultrasound shows encephalocele 4 by 4 centimeters. What should be the next step?
Next step should be look for additional anomalies, because an encephalocele is a neural tube defect, and of course it's not a nice one to have, because half your brain is popping out of your scalp. That's not a good thing. It may not be lethal, but it will have a high morbidity. But what would be very important in the presence of a neural tube defect is because some of these encephaloceles can be associated with genetic syndromes, and particularly Meckel-Gruber syndrome. So I will look at the fingers and toes, count the fingers and toes, and I will look at the kidneys as well to check for polycystic dysplastic kidneys. And if there is the triad of this, then very likely it's a Meckel-Gruber syndrome, which has a recurrence risk of 1 in 4. However, if the fingers, toes are all right, the kidneys are all right, and there is absolutely nothing else, then this is an isolated neural tube defect. And I would advise them, of course, this is a termination of pregnancy. It's only fair to terminate this pregnancy. I would advise them before planning their next pregnancy to start taking folic acid and bicodexamine at least 3 to 4 months beforehand, and plan their pregnancy properly so that the risk of recurrence of neural tube defects is reduced, right? It is not removed, but it is reduced. But if they have recurrent neural tube defects all the time, then it is important to check for, methyl tetrahydrofolase reductase, and, look for other causes of recurrent neural tube defects.
Right. Is there any change in age cutoff for higher risk of Down syndrome, as in from 28 to 30?
No, don't worry about the age. As I said, it's only a starting point.
Right. Primary spontaneous conception, first visit at 29 weeks, hypothyroidism since 3 years, on treatment, hypo. No previous scans or investigations. On scan, 16 mm echogenic mass in the right ventricle in close proximity to the moderator band. Echogenic focus in left ventricle, no other cardiac finding, no other anomaly. How to counsel?
So it's like, I will obviously have to see the image there, but from what you tell me, it sounds like a cardiac rhabdomyoma. a solitary cardiac rhabdomyoma. If heart connections otherwise look normal and the blood flows are normal, a solitary cardiac rhabdomyoma, there's a high possibility that it might resolve during the course of pregnancy itself. But we need to do a genetic evaluation because some of these cardiac rhabdomyomas can be associated with tuberous sclerosis, right? So you need to get a geneticist involved in that and evaluate for tuberous sclerosis. And there are genetic diagnoses available for tuberous sclerosis as well. But again, tuberous sclerosis with cardiac rhabdomyomas, many of them are non-lethal and they can subside. But what causes problem for them is the brain tumors. If there are brain tumors, then those can end up with epilepsy and other problems.
Okay. Which lab is doing autopsy? Because she had a patient who had an IUFD with
I think there
SG.
are quite a few places who are doing autopsies. Yeah, I think autopsy is a good thing to do. And I know that, I use the services of one of my students who has great interest in doing autopsy. So I send my babies to her. But I know that Lilac also does pickup of fetuses. So you need to see and locally if that is available. See, I think one must remember that fetal autopsy cannot be equated to pathology. Pathologists, fetal autopsy is a specialty in its own. Right. Sure. So it's very important that I don't want reconfirmation of my ultrasound findings. I want, yes, confirmation of my ultrasound findings, but also additional problems if that is the reason why I would do an autopsy. Right. So it's very important that you do your groundwork on where and who does your autopsy. I know Lilac is setting up their autopsy systems for collections, although I have not used their services. As I told you, I use my own student who has interest in autopsy. So she does a good job with that.
Okay. Any tricks to get a good mid-sagittal view for NT measurement?
Practice.
Any tricks?
Practice.
Perfect.
More and more practice. The more you do, the more you learn. Yeah.
I know. True. Prognosis of a baby with omphalocele?
We will do a practical workshop. I think that will be easy. Then I can show you the movements of the probe. That's easy.
I know. Hopefully very soon. Prognosis of a baby with omphalocele?
If there is no chromosomal abnormalities and the omphalocele is small, the prognosis is likely to be good. Surgical outcomes are good. And however, if there is omphalocele is large, very large with the liver inside, then the surgeons find it difficult to bring the skin in front of, to cover the baby's tummy. So those ones can be a bit troublesome. However, I think I would leave it depends really on the size of the omphalocele, but make sure that there is no trisomy 18 or any other chromosomal abnormalities.
Yes. I'll take the last question now. Grossly dilated bowel loops reported as possibly Hirschsprung's. That was a clarification.
I think most likely it's a lower bowel atresia. I would not call it Hirschsprung's because Hirschsprung's has got a very specific pathological or pathognomonic basis. Right. So I would not call it Hirschsprung's. Hirschsprung's is not an ultrasound diagnosis. Bowel dilatation, again, surgical correction is required. Gross bowel dilatations, the baby needs surgical input. And many of these will be detected only in the 3rd trimester. So, and some of them will do well as well. Only if there is multiple level atresias, they will end up with short bowel syndrome and other things. But if there is a single or 1 or 2 atresias, they do well. They tend to do well, and many of them are not associated with chromosomal or genetic problems. So it's a pure surgical issue, and if good surgeons will do a good job.
Wonderful. This was an extensive, exhaustive Q&A session, but which is what we want. That's why Dr. Pratima, we just have one topic, one faculty, so that we have a nice interactive session at the end of this topic. At the end of the session. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me around.
I know you must be tired, but the questions are pouring in and the chat box is full of compliments for you. Please take some time to go through the chat box. People are asking for your number as well. Few doctors have asked for your number.
You can give them my number.
So those of you who want your number can contact me.
Yeah.
I can give you her number. So thank you so much once again.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for
Yeah,
having
we
me.
really enjoyed this session, and we'll talk once again if we can really do that practical session, as you said that
I would love
on a
to.
practical
Yes,
demo.
yes.
If we can do that, we'll get back to you with that.
Thank
There
you
are
so
again a
much,
few
Vivek.
comments in the chat box saying they're waiting for that session.
Thanks. My pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Over to you,
Thank you.
Smita.
Thank you so much, and everybody have a great evening. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Thank
have
you
a
so
lovely
much.
weekend as well. And Happy New Year to everybody.
Yep, yep.
Thank
There
you
is a
for
nice
better
compliment.
times and
Yeah.
much show off times, I would say, rather than sitting and watching screens and laptops and computers. Yeah.
I know. There's a nice compliment for you. Dr. Shipra is saying you have a graceful aura.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks so much.
And loads of them as well.
Very
More
kind.
compliments for you. Okay. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Swada, over
Thanks
to you,
so much.
please. Take
Yes.
over.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for an excellent session. It was a wonderful
pleasure.
tour into the intrauterine life, and you have thrown light on such a sensitive and important topic of managing non-lethal anomalies. And it was made even more interesting because of the actual case scenarios and the question and answer session which we had. I'm sure many of us have our ideas clear now. Thank you so much, ma'am. Waiting for the practical session.
My
I
pleasure.
thank our chairpersons, Dr. Kunda ma'am and Dr. Namrata ma'am, for chairing the session. I now invite our lovely Secretary NOGS, Dr. Rajasi ma'am, for delivering the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Swada. Pratima ma'am, you're amazing. पैर छू लिया आपके आज तो.
Thanks so much. I think you people made my day.
You
Made my
never
day, made my
stop
week.
to mesmerize us time and again. Every
Thanks.
session is jam-packed, action-packed, and wonderful.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks.
I must thank all your fellows for being part of this whole event and reading out the case stories. They were all so interesting cases, and they made the thing so practical and understanding. The understanding was much better. Thank you so much once again
Thanks
for
a lot.
sparing
Thanks
your
a lot.
valuable time for us.
My pleasure.
It
Have a lovely
definitely
weekend.
added value to the new year session that we have begun on a bang with you.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks.
And special thanks to our chairpersons, Dr. Namrata Rathod and Dr. Kunda Shahane. Your inputs have been always valuable. I must thank our dear little Swadha Kotpallivar. Very smoothly she has conducted the session today, Swadha. Thank you. You're a sweetheart.
Thank you.
Special
Thank
thanks
you.
to our
I would love to thank each one of you for all the lovely compliments, but I'm reading the compliments as well. It just makes my day. I honestly, I think being a
Ma'am, you
woman,
deserve each of them.
yeah, and I think it matters. Yeah, come on, it really
does,
matters
yeah.
that we all talk nice things about each other. Thanks.
And these compliments come straight from the heart,
Thanks from the heart too. I do look forward to it. I'm still the same 16-year-old who looks out for compliments. So that's fine.
We all are.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, and that's the way we have to move forward. Thank you.
Yeah. So our CME today was granted 1 MMC and 1 ICOG credit point. Our special thanks to MMC Observer for today, Dr. Shashikant Raghuvanshi. And also thanks to Dr. Mandakini Meg, Chairperson ICOG, and Dr. Parag Biniwale, Secretary ICOG, for granting ICOG credit points to our CMEs always. For those of you who wish to seek these credit points, please send us your name, your registration number, your email address, and your mobile number to any one of the following numbers which have been written on the chat box: 98233-59691 or 97651-88650. And in case you wish to be notified of our future CMEs, please do send us your name and mobile number to our office number at 93566-32671. We shall add you to our broadcast list and we shall notify you of our future CMEs. Also, don't forget to visit our Facebook page by the name NOGS and our website nogs.in. I have already posted the link in the chat box and I shall do it again now. My heartfelt thanks to all the participants from all over the country and world who have logged into today's session. I mean, it was definitely a magnet that was our faculty. Her charm and her acumen has pulled so many of them. And time and again, you people log in and keep on encouraging us. So thank you so much for that. Please give us your feedback and please keep on supporting our CMEs. With that, I would like to sign out for the evening. Wish you all a very good evening. Enjoy and have a happy new year, all of you. Thank you.
Great. God, you must be tired, Dr. Pratima or Sheila. Okay, so great session again. Thanks, Kunda.
Thank you, ma'am.
मस्त झाला session, ना?
The question answer session was very good, ma'am.
I know, that's what Dijoganची ही speciality आहे ना. That you have nice long Q&A.
Yes, yes, yes.
No, एकच speaker ना एकच topic, त्याच्यामुळे मस्त interaction होता.
आणि basic
Otherwise,
questions also got cleared, ma'am.
Yes,
Very
yes.
basic for, yeah.
आणि टॉपिक असा होता ना की खूप क्वेरीज असतात लोकांना.
Yeah.
So first she wanted to take optimizing first trimester scan. I said no, that's been done many times. I want non-lethal anomalies only because dilemma is only there na, when you have a non-lethal anomaly at hand.
Yeah.
So good we had this topic today. Again, someone is asking for ICOG points. Dr. Rajasi will post the message, Dr. Sarita, in the chat box. Please take quick screenshot of that message.
Okay, I'll start screen sharing, ma'am.
Yeah, do that. Please stay back. Those of you who want to avail the MMC and ICOG credit points, please take this screenshot of this message. Those of you who want to avail MMC ICOG credit points, we have already shown this this picture in between just before the Q&A also. Right. I hope you've taken this. You've taken a picture of this. All right. And this, Rajasi?
Yes, ma'am.
If you can just tell about this number.
Yes. This numbers, dear friends, on your screen right now is for the future notifications. If you need to be notified of our future CMEs, please send us only your name and mobile number on this number. So we'll add you to the broadcast list and we shall be sending you notifications of our future CMEs.